Welcome back to Deprogrammed. This is the New Culture Forum show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a senior editor at the European Conservative, and I'm delighted to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, the host of Tomlinson Talks at thelotuseaters.com, and our special guest this week, Patricia Patnode, an American writer, commentator, and research fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Patricia, thank you very much indeed for joining Connor and me today. Before we begin with some comparing and contrasting of the American right and the British right. So in terms of what the British right can learn from their American counterparts, there has been a very concerted effort in the United States, hasn't there, to produce practical plans of action for a potential future Trump administration. Things like Project 2025, the Democrats complain about that a great deal, and even patronage networks like American Moment. Tell us a little bit about these, what you think the British can learn from them, and whether you think they will be successful in the American case.
Right. So how think tanks, I refer to think tank, how think tanks generally work is that people go to them and develop policy expertise, and then they move in and out of government or produce papers that advise government officials for like what they should be doing in their particular policy area. So there's always been a sort of talent network on the right, loosely the right, the libertarian right, and the conservative right in Washington, D.C. that between administrations, if you are in or out of power, the same goes for liberals, those on the left. You go between think tanks and the government, and then you identify talent that you want through that way as you like meet junior staff. But now we've seen American Moment, which is specifically trying to cultivate young staff that is particularly more conservative and has a more specific set of values than we've seen in the past, where the Heritage Foundation, for example, always had a job bank and always, I think, was hoping to somehow facilitate recommendations to people and identify like good talent, but that wasn't a specific thing that existed on its own. That's definitely new that we see with American Moment. And Heritage's Project 2025, which has gotten a lot of press, is not new at all. They've been doing these plans since Ronald Reagan. Famously, Ronald Reagan took Heritage's mandate for leadership and gave it to every member of his, I think, cabinet and said, this is what we're doing. This is the game plan. So they've done that ever since. The branding for Project 2025 is new because they seem to have been marketing it to the new Trump administration, if he wins or not. So that's new. And then it became kind of the boogeyman for the Harris campaign to say, oh, this is this horrible thing. They have this nefarious plan, when really it's just a lot of mostly like free market policy recommendations that a lot of people from a lot of different think tanks collaborated in producing.
But there's also quite a lot in, I've not read the whole of Project 2025. I won't pretend to have done so. It's roughly 1,000 pages long, I believe, maybe even slightly longer than that, or maybe it's 500 pages, I forget. But it doesn't matter. I've not read it, and very few people have probably read it in full. I certainly doubt Trump's read it in full. He's been trying to distance himself from it, of course, because I don't know, it seems to be a sign in his mind that some of these Democrat blows are landing, and he wants to distance himself from them. It was mentioned so many times at the DNC, indeed. But it does contain, as well as certain free market tweaks, which is always what you're going to expect from Conservatism Inc., if we want to call it that. They're very interested in their sort of supply-side reforms. There's a lot about, there's a fair bit I understand about cultural change as well, and trying to restructure the American government in ways that will be more favorable to a Trump administration. Things like going after the deep state, that's part of the prospectus, isn't it, as well?
You know, I'm not sure what they have in there as far as that goes, so I'm not sure.
You know, okay. Well, I think Kevin Roberts has talked about this. In any case, it's certainly true. Bringing it back to the British parallel, that we sort of have these institutions, don't we, Connor? But they haven't fully updated themselves in line with the realignment that's gone on the right in the last 10 years. So we have these sort of center-right outlets like Policy Exchange and one or two others, I suppose Civic Future, you could sort of bracket under that, but they're not sort of captured by Farageism or populism in the same way that a Heritage seems to have been captured, might sound like a negative word, but in the same way that Heritage it very much bears the imprint of the Trumpian revolution. Do you think that we should be imitating these models? Colin?
Well, on Civic Future specifically, it's run by the same sort of people that controlled candidate selection at the Conservative Party that produced Rishi Sunak. So the idea that they're going to right Britain's ship and train up the next class of civil servants who are going to reverse the long march for the institutions, I have my doubts. I know there are things in the works to try and emulate some of the successes of American Moment, because one of the things that Project 2025 and obviously American Moment are seeking to do is clear out the Trump administration of all the people that frustrated the democratically elected mandate given to the government beforehand, the sorts of military generals as well who lied to Trump about the amount of people that were staffed inside Syria when they said we've withdrawn all our troops from there. They're hoping that they can, obviously Democrats are going to say, oh, you're putting true believers and Trumpsters and MAGA Republicans in. It's like, yes, we're going to hire the people that actually want to do this job. In the UK, we don't have that possibility. The civil service remains, no matter who the incumbent government is. We don't have a Washington doctrine where they're all cycled out. And so that might be one of the roadblocks, actually. It's that not just that the American NGO space has more money, more funding, and seemingly more competence on the right, but it's also just how do we clear out our institutions of the people we don't want there? Because we don't have the power to just remove them. We just instead have to train people up and hope that you get the job and hope they do the right thing when they're in there, right?
Yes, well, I suppose in the case of American Moment as well, as you say, Patricia, this is unique in that, and this is something that we really don't have on the right. We've obviously got this sort of reform insurgency going on in the moment, being spearheaded by Nigel Farage, declaring a political revolt as he did when he announced his candidacy for Clacton. They've now got 5 MPs. And one thing that Farage has been trying to do is boost his youth support, particularly with young men, but trying to go broader than that as well. American Moment is very... you think you've already had things like the Federalist Society, as I understand, which were keen to elect conservative judges, and many of the victories in the last administration were themselves recommended by the Federalist Society. Those nominations to the Supreme Court were Federalist Society recommendations. But there's this sort of talent patronage network trying to bring young talent into the conservative movement now, which is tied to the hip of the Republican Party. Can you talk a little bit more about what the American right is trying to do to court young talent rather than just creating content, actually doing practical things in terms of bringing young people on board?
Right. So American Moment's model is kind of novel because they're not requiring people to, I think, have their parents support them. Which, I mean, I interned in Washington, D.C., and it was because my parents paid for me to do it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they paid for me to stay at very expensive university housing, to pay for my meals, to, float about D.C. As a college intern, which was a huge blessing. If I wanted to do that on my own, at 19 when I did it, I probably would have had to take out like a $5,000 personal loan. Mm-hmm. And, perhaps that trade-off is worth it, but it's unclear. So we have seen senators and representatives, Republican senators and representatives often paid their staff or paid their interns. So I think that was a way to give people that weren't just from like upper middle class or had parents that were willing to spend the money to do that. And now it's become a standard. Now they're required to pay their interns. So that's something. So that was something that Republicans, I think, at least in Congress at the time that I was there, that they were doing, that Democrats weren't doing. And now you see, I think, more internships trying to figure out how to cultivate that talent, and especially post-pandemic and post kind of the wokeified universities, people are quite scared to be associated with anything conservative because you're just so often worried about being blacklisted from any sort of normal job. So I think they're trying to be more supportive of people that come from unconventional backgrounds that are more comfortable having that association. So American Moment, you don't have to have a college degree. You can apply. It's a different way of recognizing talent. And I think we'll probably see other places start to do that. That's always been the case for journalists. Like Steve Edgington right here didn't go to college, hugely successful, right? Probably more successful because he did not go to college. I think we're going to see that more and more. The same is somewhat true for journalists of all types in America. So. Yeah,
that's very interesting. I sense Connor wants to come in, but I would just make one point. I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of the Thatcher-Reagan period, whatever you think of the respective merits of centrally planned economies or nationalized industries versus, supply-side reforms, they park those economic questions to one side for the moment. One of the unfortunate cultural byproducts of that, of the 80s, I think, is that there was a premium on young, enterprising people, particularly if they did tend rightwards in terms of their ideological predilections, to go into a life of making money in the private sector, which necessarily meant that, given the way in which those the culture was changing, as you say, people had to hide their political opinions, because if you're in the private sector, you're more on the hook for sort of politically motivated and professional and social ostracization. And it meant that the idea of making money in the private sector and sort of keeping your head below the parapet enjoyed a premium which public service and being quite actively political did not. And I suppose in some ways we can see movements like American Moment as a correction to that, and we could do with a correction here.
Well, just building off something that you've actually written about before. Obviously, I've spent time in DC, hanging around with the same sort of people you have. One of the benefits of either organizations sponsoring young people coming to DC and helping find each other, or a devolution of ways to get experience outside of the university pathway, is that DC now has a thriving young conservative social sphere. I mean, something that you've written about before is that there will be like conservative men and women's houses, and they'll live together, and they'll learn to socialize with one another, and they'll learn to interact. And so you can establish a community. And even if you're afraid of being blacklisted by your social sphere or other job listings, you'll be able to have each other's back and share opportunities and help each other up the ladder. And I'm guessing that's a more encouraging backdrop than if you would have just done it all on your own, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, thank you for saying that. That's very helpful. There's a social network right now where if you are incredibly conservative, you have a lot of friends, right? And I mean, I'm like, I'm a huge I'm a very conservative person, but I'm also, I love the free market. I considered myself a libertarian for quite a while. I no longer consider myself a libertarian.
It's okay. We're all in recovery. It's fine.
Yeah. But now, like, my friends in DC are getting married very young, and they're having children. I see a baby every 2 or 3 days in Washington, DC. I don't know if you guys have that in your space in London. I feel like we are a little bit further evolved in our recognition of the importance of living out the values that we want people to live as a result of the policies that we support.
Yes.
And we're doing that in our social circles. I'm just going to use myself as an example. I live in an all Catholic women's house. There's no boys allowed in our bedrooms. We all go to church. We all really like each other. My roommates don't necessarily work in politics, but they're in the same network because we have the same values. You often find people going to the same churches, having the same dinner parties. It's not exclusively like conservative or even that political, but it's the type of lifestyle that we think people should live. So I think we're all, I'm 26, so I'm, relatively young, aging by the day. But we've tried to exercise that. And I think as a result of that, the institutions and groups that we're a part of grow and become more healthy. And I think you're also able to better recognize quality people because the things that they're talking about match the lifestyle that they have. I think it's important if you, really believe in family values that you're either cultivating a family or you at least are submitting yourself to the will of God, like why you haven't found a partner, or maybe you're a consecrated virgin or something like that. I'm Catholic, so those are just my examples. I think people need to practice what they preach, and we're seeing that with my generation, where I don't think we have seen that with older iterations of people on the right in DC. So maybe you guys should do that. I don't know. Maybe Connor, you're getting married, so
yeah, that's
the
hope. I mean, I think one of the reasons that doesn't really happen here is because DC is obviously the political capital of the US, and then you have various other progressive cities siloed across your country, which is obviously a continent pretending to be a country. And so you've not just got all of the finance people existing in one place. You've not got all the tech people existing in one place. You've not got a centralization of economic opportunity where everyone comes and goes like a giant beehive. Actually makes it a bit harder to live a family lifestyle while also having a very time-consuming London-based career. And I think just the sheer size and dispersal of the states means that different cities have different characters. And so that might be why DC having a bit more of a political character allows the more Christian conservative types working in politics to have a family life alongside a career, whereas it might not necessarily be the same if you were working in New York as a stockbroker, for example, but had the same conservative values. Does that make sense?
It's worth saying as well, it's interesting that, Patricia, you say practice what you preach. And I do agree with that, just as a moral principle. But it also makes you more effective politically because how most human beings work. Like, forget the kind of intellectual vanguard of any movement, which is sort of persuaded into social conservatism. Most people are not socially conservative because they've read the various pamphlets and treatises that exist on these sorts of moral questions. Most people aren't even aware that there are these sort of long-standing debates in ethics and in moral philosophy and political philosophy. Most people, for most people, their attachment to those sorts of conservative values are going to be downstream from patterns of activity that they're just living in the real world. And this is one of the virtues of conservatism. You don't need to be persuaded into it, properly understood. Most people, in fact, are conservative without knowing it. And the intellectuals who try and codify it in texts are the unique ones. Whereas liberalism, you kind of need to learn from a textbook. Communism, you need to learn from a textbook. All these other abstract ideologies are learned from textbooks. Then they're less immediately locatable in patterns of activity to which people are loyal and to which people commit themselves over time. And that's not just a general point. I'm using it to segue into the fact that what we seem to have today is a very strong gendered political divide, and it's expressing itself particularly in your country. There's something like and particularly among young people, there's a sort of 51-point gap at the moment between young men aged 18 to 29 and young women aged 18 to 29 in terms of whether they favor Harris, which women generally do at scale, and whether they favor Trump.
I think it was 35 in the recent New York Times polling.
There was another one as well. Let's see. Well, I have it all written down here, but my notes are indecipherable even for me. So, well, it's big. Okay.
It was 30
considerable
across pretty much all countries in The Economist as well. So there's at least a consistent baseline number cropping up.
Absolutely. And I think, and I have some theories about this, which have to do with what I was just saying about patterns of activity. I don't think it's because women have sort of logic chopped themselves into being radical feminists and men have logic chopped themselves into being reactionary Catholics. I don't think that's the reason. But do you have any preliminary theories as to why this gap is so vast, particularly among our generation? We're all Zoomers, of course.
Yeah, I think most people become more conservative as they get older. So I think we're seeing just a natural youth divide. But also, women are more, caring. We're, more empathetic.
Yes.
I think there's always been a very natural divide between the temperament of the person in politics that we want to support, and things that make people more conservative: marriage, age, wealth. If you're single, you have some type of normal job, and you're not that wealthy, and you just live in the West. We live in a liberal. The West is liberal. Kind of classically liberal, but like liberal nonetheless.
And you think that more and more women this wouldn't explain then is that what people come back to on that is that there was a time, well, you sort of answered it, I suppose, but there was a time when human nature hasn't changed, or at least we wouldn't argue, we as conservatives wouldn't argue that human nature has changed in the last 150 years or so, or even longer, frankly. So women have always been more empathetic than men, yet there were times when this empathy, this predominant inclination towards empathy and risk aversion and all the sort of compassion, all the virtues that we associate that are feminized, or rather that are feminine coded. It used to be the case that these expressed themselves in quite conservative ways. So women were disproportionately behind temperance movements in the 19th century, the prohibitionist movement, and you had all these sorts of Catholic mothers' clubs and all these sorts of things, and women actually tended to the right of men in the 1950s, and it's in the 60s that this flips. And do you think that? How would we explain the way in which certain feminine traits are being weaponized by the left? And indeed, a secondary question: how can we weaponize them in the other direction if women have these natural tendencies on the right?
I think you should marry them.
No, I agree.
Of course, I agree.
Because I think it was, what was it, about 64% of single women voted Democrat in the 2022 midterms.
Yeah.
And so the conservative as you age thing, I know that's an aphorism. I think it's just the natural cycle that people used to have of getting married, having kids, generating wealth. And so that life path of conserving what you know and love sort of fell into their lap. So maybe if I can bridge off your question a little bit, I wonder what's drawing women towards left-wing parties. Is it material interests or is it vibes? Because the material interests, there's the argument of there's the welfare state for single motherhood. There's the argument of there's abortion as a kind of sacrament for maximal freedom, but also if you back yourself into a corner and you make a decision due to hookup culture and you think, oh, I want to maintain my job, so they want the open clause to kill a baby. Those are all like self-interested reasons. But then there's also the other reasons that people are looking at, the very superficial reasons the Harris campaign is doing. We're now seeing as of The Guardian today, wheeling out against the Tories, they're like, oh, Trump's weird. Vance is weird. Isn't it really uncool? Isn't it just better to be brat, whatever the hell that means? But what do you think it more is? Are women trending left because of like self-interest and material reasons, or are they trending left because of like social vibe-based reasons?
I think it's social vibe-based reasons. I also think people are less smart than they used to be. And I don't know if it's because parents are not prioritizing like a communication of like their values and knowledge and like teaching their children how to read. But I mean, one, kids don't really know how to read anymore. I don't know if you've like seen that, but I think similarly, like the ability to like logic it out, reason it out, that's just fading away as we've removed those like the essential things that school was supposed to teach you. We've removed those from the curriculum, and then parents are also not really teaching them at home. So then you have, people go to these colleges where they're told like this is what it means to be a high performer, or you have a very specific set of things that make you successful in an industry that you can be a great engineer without like knowing how to say like buy a house or have a successful relationship, right? You can have a lot of specific knowledge without having a wide ability to like reason and operate in the world. So I think that we have moved away from people having like these like a common toolbox of how to assess goodness, badness, meaning, and value, while still having like the things that allow society to continue to operate.
So they're very technically specified, but then anything that's sort of common sense or lifestyle development is put in the box of like adulting, and it's just shunned. Yeah,
and I think we see the vibes based politics as a downstream effect of that, and also you're so socially rewarded. Like I fall prey to this. Like I buy organic vegetables. Why do I do that? That's like so stupid. There's very little. The word organic like doesn't even really mean anything. Like, you know, carrots used to be purple. Like I'm buying orange organic carrots. Like what does that even mean? So I think everyone falls into the trappings of these social pressures to buy into a value system. And now the value system has become the wider extent of it has become very nefarious. It's have an abortion, take plan B, like get on birth control, like trust your teachers, like worship these particular institutions and these types of jobs.
That's definitely true. I couldn't agree more. In the same way that compassion has been weaponized, and in the same way that empathy has been weaponized, these sort of feminine coded traits. So it's the same with social desirability. I mean, that is just more common among women, and it feeds into the risk aversion thing. Men are generally more risk seeking, and that means that they're more likely to transgress against social norms in a kind of pioneering sense, whereas women at scale tend to tend towards what are regarded as the social norms that are enshrined in a society, and that's partly probably evolutionary and has a lot to do with their more natural agreeableness. And so that's clearly being weaponized as well. When the value system has been turned upside down, women are going to be more loyal to that cultural revolution than men are. And that's reflected in the data, of course. You said marry them, and of course I agree. I think that men and women should...
Well, not all of them.
You know. Well, not all of them. One should be discerning. So I of course agree with that. But one of the problems and one of the cruel paradoxes of this is that I agree. I suspect that more family formation, a more pronatalist culture among the young would in fact reverse much of the gender divide. And it would go back to a very similar place to where it was in the 1950s pretty speedily, I imagine. The problem is that because it's so vast at the moment, the dating scene is permeated by that shift, by that gulf in values. And men and women, I think it's just, I was talking about the need to be discerning. Most men and women, it's probably best advised marrying someone with whom you share many of the fundamentals. And if those, and if that moral consensus among men and women is rupturing, then family formation becomes that much harder, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how do we get around that? Not that you're necessarily going to have quick fix solutions to this, but this is a challenge. It's not as simple as saying men and women should get married. If men and women are more different today than they ever have been in terms of their fundamental values, the dating market is going to be affected by that.
Yeah, I think the dating scene is very strange. there's like quite a few differences within the United States, like state to state and state to state culture. So, and I think the same is probably true the United States at large versus England. But I think that we have taught young women. I've written about this in the past. We have taught young women to think of themselves as men, which is, I mean, the feminist success is to not think of yourself as woman, to not think of yourself as an embodied woman, right? You should not think about the fact that you have like a limited time to have children, which is necessarily true. Men do too. You know, sperm counts like drop as you get older, but not necessarily. So I think we need to teach women about their own fertility. I think that would go a long way in making people more resistant, or at least able to recognize the like set of lies that they're being told about what options are available to them. And I also think, you know, the most meaningful thing that you can do in life, right, is like one, like worship and praise God, like to discern and live out your vocation. So, right, become a priest, become a sister, become a father, become a mother, or like join consecrated life, or God doesn't bless everyone with children, right? Just to be a spouse is like a great vocation.
I think the core of what you're saying there, to not fall afoul of something that Mary Harrington once told me, which is
settle.
Well, no.
That's what she told me once.
No, she said, if you quote Thomas Aquinas, you're losing. And even though I agree with Thomas Aquinas, not everyone is ready to read theology. I think the core of that is to say that you should privilege your relationships and your abilities to be responsible to the people that need you and love you over just perpetually spinning the wheels on a career. And I think what the problem most people are told is not just that women should become men, but that everyone should become some sort of like neutral economic actor. And the most important thing you can do is fill out a spreadsheet, and that eclipses all the time in your life for settling down and having kids and serving the people around you that aren't necessarily economic actors. And I think that's probably why things like universities and that, because I remember Cambridge was going to do fertility classes for their young female students, got shut down immediately. I think that's the reason they're not told, is because it interferes with that narrative that, you know, you're just educated, you're individual, you're economic, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are some cracks in that. I think the stay-at-home girlfriend was a great example of, there's more to life than just making money at a job, right? I mean, the stay-at-home girlfriend was a kind of a joke, because like the joke is, well, she's actually like a full-time content creator, which takes a lot of effort. But the character she is playing is a stay-at-home girlfriend. So it's not quite the same. But I think people are waking up to, I think, like the consumerist trappings, and I'm encouraged, and I think that's the solution. Like, life has meaning; it has more than economic meaning. I think the girl boss egg has cracked, and people have moved on past that. Unfortunately, I think they're starting to move on to communism, which that is not the answer.
Yes. I also, it's interesting you mentioned consumerism there, because of course you've got this weird. I don't quite know what to make of it. I sort of tend one way, and other days I tend the other way. You've got this weird sort of commingling going on at the moment between consumerism and a lot of right-wing online content, in that it's obviously designed to try and generate eyeballs, sort of content farming, slop, some people will call it. But you have this sort of curated sort of pastiche image of the kind of the trad wife, which kind of circulates on places like TikTok and on Instagram, churning butter in a field, all these sorts of tropes. And on the one hand, I sort of think, well, yeah, I think traditional values should enjoy more status in society, and that's a reflection of their growing popularity, I suppose, that people think that sells well. But then it's sort of awkwardly commingled with a kind of quite shallow desire to get clicks. What do you make of that development?
I think the interest in the trad wife as like a trending thing is just people desiring the willpower to put down their cell phones. I don't think it's much more complicated than that. And to make something instead of ordering Uber Eats, I don't think they can bring themselves to do that. So they watch this content and they think, oh, how nice and lovely.
Yes. And but then very few of them are actually, making the sacrifice. It makes it look too easy. That's another thing. Whereas, of course, a lot of it's bound up with sacrifice. Go on.
So it's a more vicarious thing than it is something that's causing you to take concrete lifestyle action. Because I always looked at it as, this is clearly not made for me, and I might cringe, but I'm a bloke. So is it better that if women are setting the incentives for women socially and they're trending in a more traditionalist, family-oriented Christian direction, that's a positive. But your picky little summary of, but they're watching this in lieu of taking actual lifestyle change action, that does make sense. So are you not encouraged by the fact that's more popular? Like, do you not think that more people just by virtue of it being popular are going to do that? Or do you think it's the people that are going to do that have already started doing it concretely anyway?
I think it's great. I think it's really encouraging that that's popular. I also think it's really encouraging. Sophia Richie, who's married to Elliot Grange, who's English, right? So they live somewhere in London, I'm pretty sure. They just had a baby. She got married at, I think, 23 or 24. She had a baby at 25. I think similarly, her content is hugely popular. She's not a trad wife, but she's doing similar things, and fans and girls online have a huge appetite for that. Hailey Bieber just had a baby, very similar, got married young. Huge appetite for it. Ballerina Farm, I think, is a great example. They're apolitical. I haven't seen them do anything political whatsoever. She's, for whatever reason, like conservative coded, which like I don't think that's true. And I think the fact that she is almost apolitical allows a lot of lefties to watch her and that escapist fascination. And it gives them a peek into rural life that people don't have anymore. In the United States, we used to be like a 98% like agricultural, like everyone is a farmer. Now it's like 6% or something. It's a very small amount of people are farmers or have any sort of connection to land or the food they grow, even to like the difficulties of producing meat. Ballerina Farm, she's beautiful, right? She's gorgeous. She has like a zillion children.
Is this the one that's married to the JetBlue?
Yeah, the billionaires.
Empire, yeah.
But I mean, he'll probably just get a couple million at the end of the day. He also has like 10 brothers and sisters or something. So like,
I'm sure he'll be able to
$4 million?
Wipe his tears with the $100 bills.
Yeah, but they what was my point? It sucks. Like you get splinters from your hardwood floor. You live far from a hospital. You have to deal with animals dying all the time. You have to like stick your hand into the back of a cow.
I've watched Lockton's Farm, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So she shows that stuff. So I think I don't think people realize that. I mean, I watch that content, so I know. Yes. Other people don't know that she's showing like, you have to do some nasty stuff to keep a cow producing milk. You have to pull the baby out. You have to separate it from its mother. So.
Yes, and so people are going to get quite the shock if they've been watching all of this highly glamorized content and they buy a farm and then they find out that it's not quite as some of it's sort of exceedingly mundane, but that's part of its virtue. It's kind of earthy virtue, where it's this sort of pristine and glamorized. The last question, Patricia, before we finish up, like Henry Kissinger once remarked, it's one of his sort of
rest in peace.
Rest in peace, yes. Made it to the grand old age.
I'm sure he's smiling up at us.
Or below, some might want to say. But at the grand old age of 100, in any case, he's once said that there will never be a true war between the sexes because there's too much fraternizing with the enemy that goes on, which is a funny comment, of course. But today there's clearly, as we're examining, there's clearly less fraternity. And where fraternity does exist, it's often incredibly, if we want to call it fraternity, which I wouldn't, it's very hedonistic. And it's reflected in things like hookup culture rather than in family formation. Do you think that a sufficient re-examination of that embrace of the sexual revolution in the 60s is going on in our generation? Obviously, we want it to be sped along, but are you happy with where the young right is at the moment in terms of its re-evaluation of the sexual revolution?
Yes, I think. So women, I mean, I'm a woman, I'm a conservative woman. Yes. There's this huge fight going on, at least from where I sit, between women from older generations and younger generations, because we're very resentful that all of our mothers put us on birth control when we were 14. And we have all these health complications. That's a routine, boring story that almost every girl can say, like, oh, I got off birth control. I gained 20 pounds. I went on this other one. I have all these complications. And I would say baby boomers, like elder millennials, they didn't quite have that. And at the same time, they were able to get married and they enjoyed kind of a more normal life. Whereas we're having trouble dating. We're having sex with people that, don't want to have a lifelong relationship with us or don't feel the same romantic sentiment. So I think there's a great separation between younger conservative women and even just younger women and women who somewhat had it all. They got to have enjoyed the fruit of the sexual revolution, and now their daughters have to suffer the consequences.
Yes.
So I think I'm encouraged, and I also think the disagreement that we're seeing between older women on the right and I think younger women on the right is evidence that things are improving.
Yes, well, I agree, and hope that is sped along, because the real cruelty of the sexual revolution, of course, is that it ruptured, for women, it ruptured intimacy from their heart, and for men, it ruptured intimacy from their responsibilities, and there's a horrible denaturing of both sexes that went on in that revolution. Patricia Patnode, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Deprogrammed. Connor, thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.